My palms were damp against the microphone, and the folded letter trembled just enough to betray me. 100 eyes fixed on me, waiting. The music from the dance floor still lingered, but now there was only the quiet buzz of people holding their breath. This was my daughter's wedding, her perfect day, and yet here I was, 68 years old, clutching the last words Henry ever left for me to share. I should tell you who I am. My name is Ellie Brooks, widow, mother, grandmother, a woman who spent most of her life keeping the peace. And yet, tonight, peace was not the gift I was asked to carry. Henry made me promise. His voice still echoes in my mind. Don't let them bury the truth along with me. I stood there, torn between my dignity and my devotion, between letting the night remain polished and polite or letting the raw truth slip out into the light. And the question pressing on me wasn't whether I could read his words, but whether I should. The air grew heavier, and as I looked out across the tables, I couldn't help but remember the sting of what I had overheard earlier that evening. The Whitman estate gleamed like something out of a glossy magazine. Crystal chandeliers glowed in every corner. Pearls and diamonds sparkled at every table, and the marble floors looked polished enough to swallow my modest navy dress whole. I had chosen it because it was simple, respectful, and within my means. But standing there, among women with gowns that cost more than my car, I felt like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding. I told myself it didn't matter. I had learned long ago how to fade into the background, how to keep my chin high even when I felt small. I sipped my water. I smiled at strangers. I kept my back straight. But then I heard it. My daughter's voice, clear enough over the hum of the room, speaking to Catherine, the new mother-in-law. And in those few careless words, she reduced me, as if I were an embarrassment best explained away. It was subtle, but it cut deep, a sting sharp enough to make me catch my breath. She was my child, my flesh and blood. Yet in that moment, she chose acceptance from Catherine's world over pride in her own mother. I didn't make a scene. I never do. But something inside me shifted. I remembered Henry's letter in my purse and the promise I had made beside his empty chair. When the music began for the father-daughter dance, my eyes went straight to the chair near the edge of the floor. It was set aside with a framed photo of Henry, smiling in the way he always did when he wanted to calm my nerves. That empty seat held more presence than any guest in the room. It reminded me of everything we had lost, and everything I still carried. Before he died, Henry made me promise one thing. He asked me to protect the heart of our family, even if someday our daughter drifted away or forgot where she came from. He wanted me to remind her gently but firmly of who we really were. I had nodded through tears, never imagining the moment would come so soon and in such a public way. As the song played and the laughter echoed around me, I felt the weight of Henry's letter pressing against the inside of my purse. His words waited there, patient and steady. Maybe tonight, for the first time, I would have to let them speak. The noise of clinking glasses and laughter faded as I slipped into the library. The heavy door closed behind me, and for a moment, it felt like I had stepped into another world. The shelves stretched high, lined with leather-bound volumes that were clearly meant to impress, not to be read. I thought of my years at the public library, where books smelled of fingerprints and hope, not polish and dust. This room was a monument to wealth, not to stories. In my purse, the envelope pressed against my fingers, just as Henry had placed it there months before he passed. He had told me it was for when I needed his voice the most. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. His words spilled into me like a tide. He wrote of his fears, how he had noticed the coolness in our daughter, the way she seemed to calculate rather than care. He worried she might one day push me toward the edges, perhaps even into a place I didn't belong, like an assisted living facility chosen for convenience, not love. Reading it now, I felt my heart split in two: grief that Henry had seen what I had refused to admit, and a strange validation that I wasn't imagining this distance. By the time I folded the letter, the tears on my cheeks had dried into resolve. Henry had prepared me. He had armed me with truth, and I knew I couldn't go back to that party the same woman I had been when I left it. I slipped back into the reception as if nothing had happened. The music was still bright, the chandeliers still glowing, the polished laughter still circling the room. From the outside, the night hadn't shifted at all, but inside me, everything had. Henry's words sat heavy in my chest, a quiet armor only I could feel. I looked across the dance floor and found my daughter. She was radiant, framed in lace and light, smiling the kind of smile people expect at a wedding. But now I saw it differently. That smile never touched her eyes. It was practiced, precise, meant to reassure, to perform. I studied her the way I used to study rare editions at the library, looking not at the surface, but at the fine print. And what I saw left me chilled. If Henry was right, I needed to know more. Much more. I didn't sleep much after the wedding. Henry's words circled my mind, steady and insistent. Instead of letting despair swallow me, I did what I've always known how to do. I went looking for answers. The next morning, I walked through the doors of the library where I'd spent most of my life. The familiar smell of paper and dust steadied me. A colleague I trusted helped me slip behind the reference desk, the place where I had once guided so many others. This time, I was guiding myself. At first, Meadowbrook Manor looked pristine. Their brochures promised elegance, safety, dignity, smiling seniors in staged gardens. But beneath that gloss, the records told a different story. State investigations, lawsuits that had been quietly settled, families describing pressure to sign over assets, stories of promises broken, lives diminished. I sat there with page after page, feeling a cold truth settle in. My daughter hadn't been talking about care. She had been talking about control, about money. Henry had seen it coming, and now I could see it too, clear as day. I closed the last file and pressed my hand over Henry's letter in my bag. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. For the first time since the wedding, I felt steady, ready. And I knew the next time my daughter smiled at me, I'd be prepared to look past it. I wanted to believe it was just lunch. When my daughter called, her voice light, almost playful, I let myself hope it was a chance to reconnect after the whirlwind of the wedding. I chose a simple blouse, took care with my hair, and walked into the restaurant with a small flutter in my chest. The place was bright, all polished wood and cheerful chatter. She greeted me with a hug, her smile wide, her tone polite. For a while, we talked about little things: the weather, the menu, the charm of the place. I held on to that warmth, hoping it was real. But then the shift came, quiet at first. Compliments laced with gentle reminders of my age, questions wrapped in concern. And then the name Meadowbrook slipped in like it had been waiting all along. I recognized the pattern, the flattery, the guilt, the careful weaving of pressure. I stirred my tea slowly, nodding as if I hadn't noticed. But inside, Henry's letter and my own research stood firm in me like a wall. This wasn't about sharing a meal. It was about steering me somewhere I didn't want to go. And I promised myself, right then, I wouldn't be cornered. Not here. Not ever. They called it a family talk. That phrase alone made me pause. But I agreed, telling myself it might just be a calm exchange. When I arrived, the setting had already been arranged. My daughter seated beside her husband, Catherine opposite, 3 pairs of eyes waiting for me. The room itself was chosen carefully neutral colors, soft chairs, a bowl of fruit on the table. Everything about it whispered calm, yet the air was thick before a single word was spoken. They began gently, warm smiles, careful voices, talk of my future and peace of mind. I nodded, listening. Then the threads began to show. Meadowbrook surfaced again, polished like an inevitability. Words about safety, companionship, dignity, all the brochure language I had already read. I sat still as they spoke, watching my daughter's hands fold neatly, hearing Catherine's smooth reassurances, noting how her husband chimed in with quiet emphasis. And then, as if on cue, came the papers. Not thick, not overwhelming, just a folder slid across the table like an afterthought. Asset transfers, guardianship arrangements, all cloaked in the language of protection. But I knew better. I had seen the investigations, the lawsuits, the warnings from families who had signed too quickly. Henry had warned me too, long before this day. Inside, unease shifted into clarity. Each tactic was so deliberate, appeals to guilt, the soft net of persuasion. And beneath it, I felt my anger stir, steady and controlled. They thought I was unprepared. They thought I would be swayed by their chorus of care. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I let the silence work for me, watching them mistake it for hesitation. They had no idea that I was not backing into their corner. I was simply waiting. And when the time came, it would be my turn to speak. With Henry's words, for a long moment, I let their voices circle the room, each word carefully chosen, each glance rehearsed. Then I placed my hands on my lap, drew in a breath, and reached into my bag. Their eyes followed the slow, deliberate motion as I unfolded the worn envelope. I told them this wasn't about my opinion. This was Henry's voice. And then I began to read. My voice stayed steady, not raised, not trembling, just clear. The words carried weight, not because of volume, but because they belonged to a man who had seen through them long before I did. Henry spoke of love, of caution, of the cold calculations he feared might come. Each sentence fell like a stone in still water, ripples spreading across the table. I watched their faces shift, smiles fading, eyes narrowing. Catherine's practiced calm faltering. My daughter's hands twitched. Her husband leaned back, silence replacing their careful arguments. When I finished, I folded the letter once more and set it beside me. No rebuttal came. No polished phrase could compete with a dead man's truth. The room held its breath, and I knew the next move was mine. The silence after Henry's letter stretched long, heavy, unbroken. I let it linger, then slid my hand to the folder I had carried in with me. No words, just paper against wood. The soft scrape as I opened it, the sharp sound of documents laid flat. Receipts, notes, printouts, investigations, testimonies from families who had been cornered into choices they regretted. Page after page, the glossy image of Meadowbrook Manor stripped bare. Their eyes followed the trail I placed in front of them. I didn't need to explain, it was all there, black and white. Every polished sentence they had rehearsed now looked flimsy against the weight of hard evidence. I felt a stillness inside me. Not rage, not even sorrow, just a quiet certainty. This was the moment Henry had prepared me for. Their confidence drained, their smiles stiffened. Catherine's fingers tapped, but found no rhythm. The truth no longer belonged to whispers or suspicion. It lay openly on the table between us, undeniable. And I knew, in that instant, there was no going back. The papers lay between us like stones, too heavy for anyone to move. I sat quietly, letting the weight of them settle, letting the silence stretch. For so long, I had carried the fear of being cornered, of being forced into choices I did not want. But in that moment, I felt something shift. I lifted my eyes, steady, and finally spoke the truth I had kept inside. I will not be moved. I will not be guilted, persuaded, or pushed into a life that is not mine. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried with it the strength of every sleepless night, every memory of Henry, every page of proof I had laid down. The line was drawn, clear and final. No one argued. Their faces told me enough. The room answered with silence, and I knew the fight was over. The silence that followed was heavier than any words they could have thrown at me. Papers lay untouched, and no one dared to meet my eyes. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the air like thunder far off. Inside, I felt drained, as though every ounce of energy had been poured into that moment. And yet, beneath the weariness, there was peace, a calm I hadn't known in years. I had spoken, I had drawn the line, and it stood. In that quiet, I realized the hardest part was over. What came next would be mine to choose. Weeks later, we met at a cafe, just the two of us, hands wrapped around warm mugs. The air felt lighter than it had in that suffocating living room where every word had been sharpened into persuasion. Here, there was no paperwork on the table, no third parties waiting for me to bend, just coffee, the hum of other conversations, and a chance to speak without masks. I noticed the difference in her voice. Less edge, less urgency. We didn't try to solve everything in that hour, but something small shifted. She asked how I was, and for once, it felt like the question was meant. I answered honestly, not performing strength, not shrinking into silence. There was still distance between us. Years of pride and missteps don't vanish over a latte. But there was also a gentleness I hadn't felt in a long time. I left that cafe with no promises, no illusions, only a quiet hope. Maybe honesty, raw and imperfect as it is, could be enough to begin again. Things feel different now, though nothing has been tied up neatly with a bow. I notice it in the way our conversations end sooner, but without that old sting. Words don't have to stretch into persuasion, and silence no longer feels like a weapon. Sometimes, it even feels like rest. We've begun to live by new terms, ones I never thought we'd agree on. Respect, boundaries, honesty. They sound so simple, but they change everything. I don't measure love by how much I bend anymore, and she doesn't press me with those practiced smiles. Our rhythm is slower, quieter, but more real. A phone call that lasts 10 minutes means more to me than an afternoon of strained politeness ever did. A shared meal feels lighter without hidden agendas behind the menu. It isn't perfect, and maybe it never will be, but it is ours now, steady enough to build on, authentic enough to protect. A year has passed, and sometimes I hardly recognize the woman I was then. Fear once sat heavy on my chest, but now I choose something lighter adventure. Not always in grand gestures, but in the quiet ways that count. I take different routes on my walks, order something new at the diner, even laugh more easily when plans change. With my daughter, I no longer shrink or defend, I simply show up as myself, and let that be enough. And then there are the bigger steps: a train ride to a city I've never seen, a class I never thought I'd try. Each choice reminds me I am not finished yet. Healing didn't erase the hard parts, but it gave me room for courage. That, I think, is Henry's greatest gift. If my story speaks to you, share it, like, comment, and let me know what adventure you're choosing next. At first, I thought Henry's gift was just the letter. A few pages, sealed in an envelope, his last words to me. But with time, I've come to see it was much more. That letter gave me the courage to stop pretending. It forced me to face truths I wanted to ignore, that my daughter and I had drifted. That silence had become my prison. His words lit a path, not with easy answers, but with clarity. They reminded me that love doesn't vanish with loss. It keeps shaping you, if you let it. Because of Henry, I spoke when I would have stayed quiet. I drew lines when I would have yielded, and slowly, I opened space for honesty between my daughter and me. What Henry really gave me was strength. Long after his chair sat empty, his last and greatest gift was permission to keep living. If his gift moves you, share this story, like, comment, and tell me what courage means to you. When I look back on this journey, it wasn't just about a letter. It was about courage, the kind that comes when you're backed into a corner and finally decide not to shrink. It was about boundaries, the quiet strength to say, "This is where I stand." And it was about love, the kind that lingers long after someone is gone, still shaping how we live and how we choose. We all carry storms in our families. We've all felt the sting of words, the silence of absence, and the challenge of finding our own voice. What Henry left me was a reminder that even in grief, there is room for growth, and even in conflict, there is space for truth. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this with someone who might need courage today. Leave a comment with your own story of love, loss, or strength. And if you'd like to walk with me through more of these journeys, please like this video and subscribe. Because sometimes, telling the truth isn't just about the past, it's about creating a future worth living.